Russian President Vladimir Putin, is dismissing the uproar over President Donald Trump sharing classified information with the Russian foreign minister and ambassador. It happened during their Oval Office meeting last week, prompting some lawmakers to raise alarms. Speaking at a joint news conference with the Italian Prime Minister today, President Putin called the attacks, quote, political schizophrenia. He went on to suggest that Russia should share the transcript from last week's talks.
Joining us now is Mark Simakovsky. He's a senior non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Mark, good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So President Putin is offering a record of the White House meeting. Is there any way that lawmakers can use or trust a transcript given to them by Russia? How do we know that they might redact some things that they don't want us to know about?
No, I'd agree. The Russian transcript will be potentially a part of, but cannot be the exhaustive description of what happened in that event and in the White House. And I think also based on the fact that we understand that intelligence was shared, it was shared surprisingly by the president's advisors, and it was shared with a partner that we cannot trust, both because of their actions and because of their history, and simply because of their conflict of interest that we have with them on an array of issues, including Syria.
You know, Mark, a transcript really seems to imply that something has been recorded and then transcribed, right? So does this mean that they actually had some sort of recording device in the Oval Office during that meeting?
Potentially. I don't understand how without some sort of device other than a note taker, and a note taker is always biased from the position of what they believe is important, how without some sort of electronic device the Russian authorities would have been able to word by word transcribe what took place, which in and of itself is concerning. But even if there are notes that the Russians could provide, those notes, of course, should be looked at skeptically as the Russian version of what took place during that meeting.
Mark, as you know, the classified intelligence came from the state of Israel. They're reportedly not happy. Describe for us the relationship between Israel and Russia.
You know, the relationship between Israel and Russia is complicated. I would say Prime Minister Netanyahu has purposely sought to strengthen Russian-Israeli ties over the last several years. You've seen a slew of Israel delegations visiting Moscow and vice versa over the last few years. Israel obviously is concerned increasingly by Russian operations around Israel with its operations in Syria, and has sought to ensure deconfliction, that no Russian planes essentially crash into or potentially have a conflict with Israeli assets as a result. And in addition, there's a huge Russian immigration population in Israel, and Israel and Russia have shared cooperation on and intelligence on terrorism. That said, Israel understands that Russia is not an ally, and Russia is not a true friend of Israel. And Israel values its relationship with the United States much more. And I'm sure that Israel would not have wanted that information that President Trump provided the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov to fall into Russian hands the way that it did.
You know, you wrote when the meeting happened that the president should have, quote, avoided the temptation to meet with Foreign Minister Lavrov. Why did you say that?
You know, we wrote that article as many of us were preparing for the Foreign Minister Lavrov to arrive, which in and of itself was a surprise. The minister was not supposed to come to Washington. He originally was scheduled to go to Alaska to meet with Secretary Tillerson as part of an Arctic Council. We wrote the article because President Trump was not prepared to meet with the foreign minister, because Russia and the U.S. policy toward Russia had not yet been defined. And our argument was both because of the political scandal that's enveloping the administration, the optics of meeting with the foreign minister in Washington surrounding these potential real scandals surrounding the president were not wise. And also in substance terms, Russia has not been a partner of the United States and has taken actions in Ukraine and Syria that are contrary to U.S. interests. So our argument was, before meeting the foreign minister, allow the channel between the foreign minister and Secretary Tillerson to ripen, to understand what the Russians exactly want from heightened and improved U.S.-Russian relations. But more importantly, what does the U.S. want from improved relations with Russia, and is it achievable? And I think what showcased to me and many others is the president wasn't ready for a meeting with Foreign Minister Lavrov and wasn't prepared, and his staff didn't prepare him appropriately And as a result, you're seeing an additional scandal enveloping U.S. Russian ties.
All right, so we know that President Putin thinks, at least he's saying publicly, that all of this is really just U.S. politicians trying to provoke an anti-Russian sentiment. That's what he says publicly, but behind the scenes, do you think that Putin and really Russia on the whole are sort of loving what they're seeing with this scandal swirling around the White House, just as another example of why democracy, in their opinion, does not work?
Absolutely. I think first point is the Russians demanded of President Trump a meeting with Foreign Minister Lavrov, and Trump very quickly accepted that request. So which showcases to the Russians that they can ask things of this current president and receive things in return. And Foreign Minister Lavrov's visit to Washington, meeting in the Oval Office, again, showcases that Russia is back and the United States is willing to engage with Russia on a normal basis like any other country, and more importantly, as a great power, which again is Russia's objective. But second, the president travels next week to Brussels for the NATO summit, and he's going to be sitting down with 29 allies, essentially around a table, discussing shared threats. And all those allies have less confidence in their American counterpart that the information that they provide and discuss won't reach Russian hands.
All right, it's a fascinating discussion. Mark Simakovsky, we thank you so much for sharing that with us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for your time.